All right, everyone, thanks for coming. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes. So thanks for tuning in. Just hang on tight. We'll get started at 7 o'clock. Thanks so much. Thank you for those who are joining us so far. We're going to start at 7 o'clock, so hang on tight, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. Thanks. All right, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there. And I think since it's 7 o'clock, we'll get started. Welcome. My name is Matt Binder. I'm a program assistant here at the Schaumburg Township District Library. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's program. And I'd like to first remind everyone the Q&A box is for your questions at the bottom. Please type those in. You feel free to type them as the presentation is going. Dr. Gooding would be happy to answer questions as they come up. Same for YouTube, put them in the chat box and I'll be happy to ask Dr. Gooding any of the questions that you might have. Dr. Frederick Gooding, is a PhD, got his PhD from Georgetown University, is an associate professor within the Honors College at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas. Gooding critically analyzes race within mainstream media, effectively contextualizing problematic patterns based upon their historic roots. As such, Dr. Gooding's best known work thus far is You Mean There's Race in My Movie? The Complete Guide to Understanding Race in Mainstream Hollywood, which has been utilized in high schools and universities nationwide. Also the co-creator of Stories from the End of the Room, How Higher Education Faculty Overcome Challenges and Thrive in the Academy. Gooding has stayed focused on the practical applications of equity within his 2018 book, American Dream Deferred, casually detailing the growth and struggles of Black federal workers in the post-war era. His latest work, Black Oscar, from May of 2020, expands his reach into cultural studies by analyzing African American Academy Award winners and how their narrative reflect and reinforce larger American history. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. Frederick Gooding.
Thank you for that introduction, Matt, and I am excited to be here and get going on this conversation that I think is relevant given the fact that the Academy Awards just took place this past Sunday, the 25th. And so what we're going to do is simply put out on the table a few thought concepts so that we can continue to talk about these Academy Awards and figure out what they actually mean to us, right? So what we're going to do is take an overview over the book that I wrote, which is entitled Black Oscars, From Mammie to Minny, comma, what do the Academy Awards tell us about African Americans, right? Well, if that's the title of the book, allow me to first state that the reason why I wrote this book is because I actually love the movies, right? So this book is not an act of revenge because I have an axe to grind against Hollywood. No, I mean, there's no way I could spend this much time doing this if I didn't actually genuinely love the movies. And so I want everyone to know that this is born out of a love for the movies. My mother introduced me to the wonderful world of movies. You can imagine, just like, you know, I see my daughter who cannot let go of her TikTok feed, like, you know, just captivated. That's what the movies did to me when I was young, right? I mean, it was just to go to this space and place where you could be transported over time to different scenarios and different people and feel the breadth of different emotions. I mean, there's just nothing that I can think of, any medium that rivals, you know, that of the movie experience. So everyone loves the movies, including me. All righty. So consider yourself lucky as far as having a couple tickets to the hottest ticket in town, and that would be our theater, which will allow people to maybe look at that which is hidden in plain sight. Okay. All right. So why don't we start from the beginning? I mean, if the subtitle is From Mammie to Minny, well, who's Mammie? Who is Mammie? Well, Mammie is actually the name of a Academy Award winning role for Best Supporting Actress. This role was played by Hattie McDaniel in the 1939 movie Gone with the Wind. So that's Mammie. Now notice, Mammie depersonalizes the individual to a degree, right? I mean, it's not like her name was Haley, comma, the Mammie, or Haley Jackson, and then you watch the movie and you learn that she's a Mammie in terms of just by her function, but her name listed in the character is Mammie, right? So I don't want to overlook how she's depersonalized in that respect. Okay, but let's move on along because, you know, theoretically, her being a human being, she would have these things called thoughts, ideas, feelings, and aspirations, right? Theoretically, but, you know, we don't think of her in that way. We only know her based upon her relationship to the white protagonist who is running the action. Scarlett O'Hara is played by Vivian Leigh, right? British actress. So who is Minny? Right? From Mammie to Minny. So, but who's Minny? is the question. Well, Minnie is also the name of an Academy Award winning role, Best Supporting Actress that went to, drum roll, Octavia Spencer in The Help. Yes, she won a role for playing a maid in 2011 from a movie entitled The Help. So I think the question we want to ask ourselves is, if Black women are still winning roles, still winning awards for playing roles of Black subjugated maids on screen over 70 years apart, what do the Academy Awards tell us about the value and visibility of African Americans? And so, while the Academy Awards may not be a big deal to you, it's not to say that they're not a big deal. And what do I mean? Well, if you did tune in this past Sunday to watch the Academy Awards, you are part of a very large audience. You were indefinitely in good company. What do I mean? Well, what I mean is that we're talking about some 255 countries televised, the Oscars internationally, and the advertising rates are ginormous. You're talking about you need roughly $3 to $5 million to advertise for only 30 seconds, right? Many of us may not see that amount of money in our bank accounts over the course of our entire human lives, right? Over the course of our entire human lives, we may not see that much money all at once. And the idea is that you're paying this for 30 seconds. Why? Because there's an audience. People are watching. The Super Bowl is the only program that can boast more viewers. Only the Super Bowl. So the Academy Awards are the second most watched program on the entire planet. So it's not my thing. I mean, I'm into movies, but, I'm not, oh, look at, his tuxedo, look at her dress. I mean, no, that's not me, but it's a big deal to a lot of people, right? And so it only behooves us to ask the questions, well, what are people watching when they're watching the Academy Awards?
So what did I miss? What did I miss?
Oh, before I forget and get into the more modern stuff, I just want to point out that Hollywood did indeed begin in a period of what we call racism. And what I mean by that? Well, if I were to ask you, what's the first ever archetype of the modern mainstream movie? What would you say? I could give you a hint and say that it came out in 1915 and it was directed by D.W. Griffith. Would you guess the answer? Well, if you guessed Birth of a Nation, then I would say you're correct. In contrast to the silent films of old, the cinematography, the pacing, the cuts, they all presaged the modern movie experience that we watch now. And so this movie is historically significant. And it is shown in film schools worth their salt all over the nation every year. But when you look at the content, a couple of problems emerge. One is that the KKK literally rides in on high on the horses to save our white damsel in distress at the end of the day. So that's our first issue. Because who's the KKK? Well, the KKK stands for Ku Klux Klan, and they are a domestic terroristic organization that have committed numerous unspeakable acts, including burning of crosses and bombing of churches, all based upon this concept of hate. So what you're telling me is that a group that has attempted to spread this message of hate against numerous individuals, whether it be Jewish, African American, Latinx, Asian American, just anyone who's not white or pure white, whatever that means. This group premised upon hate are the heroes. So that's what you're telling me. Okay. Then secondly, what you're telling me is that they're saving our white damsel in distress. But why is our white damsel in distress? Well, only because she's being pursued by a lascivious, licentious, and lustful black male, or a white male in blackface. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is racist. What is blackface? Well, blackface is also the subject of a first ever talking picture, 1927, and that is Al Jolson. So one piece to note is that in terms of the intricacies of racism. Al Jolson is a Jewish male, and Al Jolson would have been targeted by the KKK, in terms of a group that was discriminated against and ostracized and marginalized in society. But that unfortunately did not prevent him from seeing himself as white first, perhaps, and taking on this position whereby he paints his face with burnt cork or black shoe polish, and then acts out these perverted imaginings of what a black person should look or sound like, right? It's patently offensive. And that is the topic of the first ever talking picture. So again, any film school worth its salt is going to show this picture because of its historical significance. But ladies and gentlemen, I mean, the idea that Al Jolson, his family wanted him to be a cantor, meaning they wanted him to sing for religious purposes. He didn't want to do that. He wanted a life in show business. So therefore, he thought it prudent to make fun of Black people in the minstrel era. It's problematic. So this is where Hollywood began, okay? And one thing I just want to point out really briefly is when you look at the white makeup around his mouth, that actually is supposed to represent the over enlarged size of Black lips like mine, right? And so fascinating is how when Black people like me actually have Black lips, they're fat, they're made fun of, but then all of a sudden, as you see on your screen here, when Kim K or Kylie Jenner decides to artificially implant collagen into their lips, now all of a sudden they're fuller lips, right? Where's my camera? Right. Now they're fuller, right? Okay. So I can't keep up. But what I do know is that while blackface is indeed patently offensive, it also was the subject of a recent Academy Award nominee, as in 2009, Tropic Thunder. This is not a Black male. This is Robert Downey Jr., right? Otherwise known as Iron Man, even Sherlock Holmes, a couple movies. So this is him as a Black male, right? And he received an Academy Award nomination for this. So if racism were a train that left Hollywood Station, say back in 1915, the question is, when did this train become derailed? Well, what I would argue is that this train maybe did not become derailed fully. It's been modified. And, the stereotypes of old have given way to something new, a more subtle, but yet no less insidious pattern that I've identified as archetypes, right? And for the purposes of this talk tonight, I won't go too much in detail about the archetypes, although I do talk about them in the book Black Oscar. I just wanted to point out that I used that rubric as a foundational platform by which to launch this more specific rubric, right? And the rubric comes from this prior writing of mine entitled, I'm sorry, you have to excuse me a second. The publisher insists that I present the book in a certain way. So I was going to say the title, but let me do it the way they want me to do it. The name of the book is entitled,
You Mean There's Race in My Movie?
Oh my God.
Again, that's what the publisher wants me to do. Okay, so that was a little dramatic, was it not? Okay, so let's get down to the business of the 5 Black Oscar angles. So I came up with the 5-pronged rubric that will allow us to consistently measure the quality of these roles. That's my contribution. I don't go off into the deep end about, Louis Gossett Jr. was born in Tennessee and he wanted to be an actor since 13. That's not my concern. My concern is Louis Gossett Jr. as a sergeant on screen. What was his relationship to Richard Gere, right? How much power and control did he have as a sergeant, let alone a Black sergeant, right? That's what I'm interested in, right? The character roles and the quality thereof, okay? So I have this 5-pronged rubric that I will go through in a little bit more detail in just a second. But I just wanted to point out that the inspiration for the rubric actually comes from the Oscar statuette itself. If you look very carefully at the base of the statuette, of which I've had the opportunity to do when I went out to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences I was in their library and I struck up a conversation with the librarian, and actually one thing led to another. I ended up with a real authentic Oscar statuette in my hand. I'm like, wow, this is cool. So not only did I notice how heavy it was, but I also noticed these rings at the bottom, right? These 5 rings. And so I asked the librarian, hey, can you explain, or do the rings have a significance? And the answer is yes. They actually represent the 5 original branches of filmmaking. So I said, Eureka. If the Academy literally stands upon 5, then that's what I'll do. I'll create a rubric based upon 5, right? These 5 Black Oscar angles that will help us analyze and assess the true quality of these roles, okay? But so what, right? So before I go into the qualitative analysis, I wanted to do a bit of a quantitative analysis. I just want to go through some of the numbers really briefly. And the Screen Actors Guild it's not a law, but if you have any aspirations of appearing in front of a camera for pay, whether it be a commercial, television program, made-for-TV movie, Lifetime special, or a big blockbuster movie, then you need to get yourself a Screen Actors Guild card, right? So I just want to point out how fascinating that Hollywood has its reputation for being so very liberal, but it was so fascinating is how it works in against. What am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is that Hollywood is one of the most unionized, heavily unionized sectors of our American economy, right? And for some, unionization is a bad word. As a historian, that word does not bother me. In terms of workers' rights and being protected and things of that nature. But then again, I'm not a multimillionaire, right? Haha, and so in terms of the free market economy, this, that, and the third. But my point is this: Hollywood is very much unionized, and we know that that whites are overrepresented in the Screen Actors Guild, not by much, but we know that they're overrepresented. Okay. But where matters get a little more interesting is when we look at a couple other guilds, right? So just like we have a guild for the actors, we have to have a guild for the writers, the people who bring us these stories to screen and breathe life into them. And so now you're talking about overrepresentation to the tune of 90%, right? And remember, that 10% is not just African American. This is everybody else, right? And so it's not to say my white brothers and sisters are inherently racist. No, that would be rude and it'd be wrong. But it is to say that 9 times out of 10, we only have one perspective. Right? How are we best suited to tell all these different stories if we only have one perspective in the room? Right? But it gets even better. When we look at the numbers for directors, people actually responsible for helping these ideas come to life. Ooh. Yeah, slim pickings. Remember, 2% is everybody else. Everybody else, right? So from a quantity perspective, we see how there's simply not that many opportunities for Black, Indigenous, and people of color to exert their influence on what we see on Friday, Saturday nights at our local theaters, right? There's just not that much opportunity. Right? And so it only behooves us to ask the question. It begs the question of, so what are we actually seeing, right? When we look at these nominations or awards, what are we actually looking at, right? Just to round out our discussion about quantity, do understand that many people have been looking at this issue for quite some time. So you have professional researchers out in school you might have heard of, UCLA, near kind of sort of Hollywood. And they've documented as recent as 2018. I think it's like every 2 years, but COVID kind of delayed them on the latest report. But I doubt this number is going to like triple, right? I doubt it. I could be wrong, but I'd be surprised if, we look up and this number is off 4.2 or something. But even still, 4.2 is less than half. The bottom line is that 1.4 out of every 10 lead actors, right, are people of color. And so, again, we don't have many opportunities to see diversity on screen. And so if and when we do, the question is, how do we go about evaluating what that diversity means to us, the quality of that diversity? Okay. So let's do a little analysis. Speaking of the numbers, I have them right here in front of you. This is for the 91 period that I studied. And this past Sunday was the 93rd year, by the way, because my book came out like right after the 92nd, and I was unable to put in the 92nd numbers in there because I had to go to print earlier, and then the 93rd just came out, okay? But for the 91-year period that I studied, here are the numbers. No one category has over 1.5%, right? Wow, over nearly a century, like 91 years. By the way, there's 77 total African-American nominations during that 91-year period. And I think that number is up to 81 now, because Cynthia Erivo received one last year, that'd be 78. And then Lakeith Stanfield, Daniel Kaluuya, and then Viola Davis. I know those three for sure. And so that will put us to 81 total. But the point is this, in terms of the 91 year period that I studied, only 19 winners. Only 19 total winners, okay? And we see how even the largest category, Best Supporting Actress, still could not penetrate 2.5%, okay? So that's the quantity. So I thought, which is just as important, if not perhaps more so, is this idea of quality. How do we incorporate quality? So this is my offering, the 5-pronged rubric. These are 5 angles that you should ask of yourself every time that you come across a Black Academy Award nominee or winner. And this will help you evaluate what this actually means. So let's go with the first one, Black non-American. Did you realize that nearly a fifth of all Black Academy Award nominees are not African-American? And what does that mean? Does it mean, Dr. G, you woke up and started drinking your xenophobic juice this morning? Like, what's up with that? Like, no. I didn't have any xenophobic juice. All I'm saying is this. My beef is not with any individual actor or actress. My beef is with Hollywood. So this speaks to the paucity of opportunity. The African diaspora is quite extensive, as you know. And we're talking about Caribbean, South America, some 60 odd countries over in the continent of Africa, continent of Africa, right? But I mean, the UK, I mean, the diaspora is extensive. But what I'm talking about is, what does this mean for African Americans who live in America and depend upon Hollywood to reflect their image? How many opportunities do they have, or do we, because I'm an African American myself, to share our stories and our images, okay? And so here's the deal. Let's take, for example, the movie Harriet, which is short for Harriet Tubman, starring Cynthia Erivo, right? That's what she was nominated for last year. Again, I'm happy for Cynthia Erivo. I'm happy for her family. My question is for a distinctly African-American heroine, right? I mean, geographically, this is specific. Harriet Tubman crossed the American border to Canada, 15 to 19 times, with over 300 people, right? And so the idea is that she's a distinctly African-American heroine. And you're telling me that you can't find in the streets of Los Angeles, California, any Black female willing to play the role of Harriet Tubman? I mean, again, it's not like Cynthia Erivo is a household name. Like everybody knows her, from way back when, and, we just had to cast her in this role. No, that's not the case. So, I mean, this is a role whereby you could have cast anybody, but they didn't. And if you think I'm being xenophobic, that's fine. I'm just following the same logic that was adhered to when there was a casting call for Churchill, right? As in Winston Churchill, the movie. Magically, they didn't find anybody from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Magically, right? They didn't find anybody from Worcester, Massachusetts, right? They didn't find anybody from Wichita, Kansas to play the role of Winston Churchill. No, they happened to find a British actor in Gary Oldman to do that. Okay, next is crossover. Over a third of all Black Oscar nominees are not classically trained actors, right? Meaning that we often overlook how so many of these roles go to comedians, Chris Tucker, Chris Rock, Tiffany Haddish, Kevin Hart, right? Or sports stars, or musicians even, right? And so what this is saying is that yes, I can pursue a career in Hollywood. I just would probably be in a better position if I had a platinum selling album first, right? And so, think about what type of pressure that creates, where, the only way I can be cast in the movie is if I bring in literally my own audience. And so that makes me a more sound bet, right? Hollywood is not risking as much in terms of having to put in the time, money, and energy to cultivate an audience, right? And so that's my beef. My beef is with Hollywood here again. Deja vu, quite similar in that you were talking about 40% of these nominees are repeats, right? And think about this year. Daniel Kaluuya was a repeat, right? Because he was nominated before in Get Out. Viola Davis was a repeat. She's been nominated 4 times before. And, this speaks to the paucity of opportunity. While we have 77 total nominees, or 81 if you want to include the more recent ones, they're not being spread out against 81 different people, 77 different people. It's literally the same 4 or 5 people that are getting heavy rotation. God help us all if Morgan Freeman, Samuel Jackson, Denzel Washington, they all get in a car accident, and if Viola Davis was along for the ride as well, game over. And the next piece that I would like to talk about that speaks to this idea of quality is the gravity of reality. So what I found is over 80% of all Academy Award Black nominated roles, their characters dealt specifically with the 2 evil twins of either poverty or racism, poverty or racism, poverty or racism. 80%. So that means each and every time you see somebody like me, even if there's a Black protagonist driving the action, they're grounded, they're weighted by the realities that unfortunately plague so many African Americans off screen, right? This idea of poverty and racism, right? And on the flip side, many of my white brothers and sisters are liberated by what I call the freedom of fantasy. The freedom of fantasy. I think I have an example of what I mean when I say freedom of fantasy. 15 seconds, check this out.
The power of imagination. The thrill of adventure. The journey will be electric. The Chevy Bolt.
Okay, let's rewind just for a little bit. For starters, X-Wing fighters are not real, at least not yet, okay? So that's fantasy. And it hurts me to say that as a Star Wars fanboy, but when I went to Galaxy's Edge out in Los Angeles, I didn't see it flying for real. I mean, I saw a stationary X-Wing fighter. I wanted to believe. I was like, oh, is it real? I mean, I just did not see it moving at all. It was just stationary. And, the way Disney did it, it was so artfully done. It felt like it was close to you because the nose is kind of sticking out, but you kind of sort of can't touch it. It was like, actually quite well guarded and fenced. So, I don't know. Maybe that was like a prop or something. Maybe it wasn't real. But, I had a good time. I did. The Millennium Falcon was absolutely awesome. But these things aren't real. Secondly, if it were real, we're not going to have a piece of multi-million-dollar military equipment flying this close to the ground, at a risk of injuring the pilot or or damaging the craft, right? Mind you, it's an X-Wing fighter. It's not an X-Wing flyer. You don't go to the Bahamas in this. No, the idea is that it's meant to just fight. That's what it's meant to do. It's only room for a pilot and a droid. So it's not going to be flying that close to the ground. And maybe I'm overanalyzing. I'm just making the point that this is not real. Lastly, no disrespect to American-made cars, but Chevy Bolt is just not that fast. And hyperspace, more like hyperbole, right? This is an exaggeration, right? So this is not real, but we don't think of it. It's just normal white lady behind the steering wheel. This is all great. It's all good. We don't even think of it. It's just 15 seconds. You know, you just move on. But I want you to start thinking about to what degree you commonly see whites liberated by what I call the freedom of fantasy, whether it be exploring a world full of dinosaurs, whether it be even a talking teddy bear who can be a hard partying, hard charging individual up the shenanigans, to 8-foot blue people at a faraway place with islands in the sky called Pandora. I'm talking about Avatar. I mean, we often overlook how fantasy is often only beholden to our white brothers and sisters, right? Because Still in the Struggle speaks to this idea as well, in that would you believe that nearly a quarter of all Black nominees died before the end of the movie? Wow. So here are all 19 winners, all assembled right here in front of you. Just take a few moments and just look through, see whether these pictures remind you of the roles. Have you seen all their movies? I've seen every single one of these movies. And I think what we need to start asking ourselves is to what degree have these roles challenged or merely upheld the status quo? Right? So therefore the rhetorical question, are these Academy Awards or Academy rewards? Are we just merely rewarding people for upholding the status quo? But when it comes to some larger ideas and narratives about power and control, of which is still being negotiated, as you all can tell by the aftermath of the Derek Chauvin trial, the aftermath of the Daunte Wright shooting, the aftermath of the Adam Toledo shooting, the aftermath of the Ma'Khia Bryant shooting, the aftermath of the, right, Michelle go on. We're still negotiating this idea of the value and the visibility of Black lives, right? And what's fascinating is how when you scroll through, virtually none of these roles feature a Black person in power, let alone in power in society generally, as in power over white people. And I hate to phrase it like that. I hate to say it like that. I'm just trying to make it plain because I work for a university. So white people have power over me. I mean, if I don't listen to my dean, I have a problem. If I don't listen to my provost, I have a problem. White people have power over me. Right? And that's just normal, right? I've been in so many environments where white people have had power over me. Right. And the question is, for my white brothers and sisters, when was the last time you've been in a scenario where you had a Native American brother or sister in power over you, telling you what to do? When was the last time you've had Latinx telling me what to do? Like, this is it. Not my manager and I get along, but no, as in running the whole operation. Like, what they say goes. It unfortunately may not be as common as we would like to think, right? And so what I'm suggesting is that even within the unlimited hallowed space of our imaginations, it appears as if Hollywood is still operating on a pattern where anytime you see Black images, they're still limited. Another pattern to point out really briefly before moving on is what I call para-realistic movies, whereby most of the roles go to best supporting actors and actresses. But there are occasions where Blacks have been the protagonists, they've been driving the action. But usually this only happens when it's based upon a true to life story of an extraordinary individual, right? So in other words, we're not devising something new. We're not digging into our bag of fantasy and imagination like we did with Avatar. No, it's based upon a true story. So take, for example, top row, fourth from the left. That's Denzel and Glory, based upon a true story. Second row, fourth from left, Ray, based upon a true story. Third row, first from left. As Forrest Whitaker as Idi Amin in Last King of Scotland, based upon a true story. And let's not overlook how they darken his skin to make him appear more menacing. Third row, second from left, Dreamgirls, based upon a true story. Third row, fifth from left, 12 Years a Slave, based upon a true story. Fourth row, third from left, Green Book. Mahershala Ali as Dr. Shirley, based upon a true story. And I had a question mark from before the Oscars to see, what would happen. But we see number 20, the 20th winner, as far as acting category, Daniel Kaluuya. He checks a couple of boxes, as in Black, not American, right? Black, not American. And also Judas and the Black Messiah, based upon a true story. a movie that deals with poverty and racism. It deals with them both, right? So it's interesting how that fulfills the pattern in so many ways. So finally, my party people, when we talk about from Mammie to Minny, the changes that have taken place over the years, numerous changes have taken place. But when it comes to the Black image, I really want us to think carefully about how much has changed. And so if racism were this train that left Hollywood Station in 1915, again, the question is, did this train become completely derailed? Or perhaps has this train been remodeled, whereby rather than the loud, lumbering, pollutive locomotive of old, we now have something that is slicker, sleeker, quieter, more fuel efficient. So in other words, we enjoy the ride, even though we're still on the same track. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, my question for you is it not true that when it comes to Black, Indigenous people of color, that Hollywood has proven itself to be chronically deficient when it comes to exercising its imagination? Because one place where we're all the same is the box office. Hollywood will take our money just the same. But it appears to me, Dr. G, that even though we all pay the same price of admission, as people of color, Blacks in particular, we disproportionately bear the cost of omission. My name is Dr. Frederick Goodham Jr., aka Dr. G, and now that you've had a glimpse of the Black Oscars experience, may you never see movies the same way again. Thank you. I'll take questions.
All right, thank you, Dr. Gooding. All right, I'm gonna give people a chance to type in some questions if they have any. Remember to use the Q&A box here on Zoom, and if you're on YouTube, there is a chat box right near the video. Feel free to type your questions in there, and we'll ask Dr. Gooding some questions. I actually had a question, if you're asking my question. The idea about parabolic movies, and you had told us with your qualitative analysis just the amount of directors and people that greenlight projects and take them on. Do you think that because the majority of them are of a single race, of a single viewpoint, that they are more attracted to people stories than they would be toward an overall other kind of representation?
That's a fascinating question. I mean, because when I think about movies like, say, Fences, for which Viola Davis won a couple years ago, or even Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, this year, or even, Judas and Black Messiah to a degree, I think that the good part is that these movies do develop Black characters in contrast to some of the more widely distributed movies that actually lean and depend more upon stereotypical imagery to get their points across. So when you look at a Fast and Furious type movie, it's made for like a large common denominator, which is anyway. I mean, this is one of those movies where you're half watching it and you still can get the point. So because of that, these movies ironically depend more so on existing narratives and stereotypes because you don't have a whole lot of time to develop characters. I mean, you have to go with, oh, that's the villain. He's missing an eyeball. He's wearing black leather. Clearly, he's evil. That. I mean, it's just one of those deals, right? You're just trying to get to the point quickly. That way you can spend time on the action and the explosions. So, to your point, when we have these other movies, I think that they're good for developing the other aspects of Black humanity. I mean, this idea that not all Black people play basketball and do rap music. Oh my God, these are real people with problems. Like, oh, this is interesting. But see, the flip to that though is we're largely talking about what I call insular movies, meaning that movies that typically develop Black characters most are movies that only have Black characters in them. I mean, who else can we develop if there's only Black people in the movie, right? We have to develop somebody's character. And the other aspect of that is and not to sound critical, and I want the audience to follow me, is that, Matt, I mean, again, I mentioned very briefly, I don't want to go too much in depth because, it can open up some scabs here, but I myself am still processing the whole George Floyd piece. I mean, it's just, I'm really at a loss for words on how to explain why an individual would fail to acknowledge just the humanity of another individual, after 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I mean, the Dante Wright scenario where the officer mistook her gun or taser for a gun, whatever, after 26 years in the force, I'm still having difficulty with that. But maybe we can contextualize it and say she was under duress. She didn't have a whole lot of time to think. Maybe, but the whole 8 minutes and 46 seconds, that's like a whole nother ballgame, Matt. I mean, what happens after 5 minutes and 46 seconds? Can you get up off his neck, please? Oh, okay, fine. All right, you got me. But stand back. I need order. 5 minutes. Give me 5 minutes before. After 8 minutes, I'm not with you. I just don't understand now. I just don't. So I say this to say that happened last year, and what happens? I get the chance to relive it this year with the different camera angles. I'm watching the trial because I didn't know that he would be found guilty on all 3 counts. It was a mathematical possibility he would not. I mean, remember, we've seen Emmett Till, we've seen, Rodney King, we've even seen George Zimmerman. I mean, George was walking the streets. I mean, I thought that was, clear cut. So I didn't know. That's why I had to watch it just to make sure I can make a informed decision. But it was painful to watch. It was painful to relive that. What's my point, Matt? My point is that as a Black male, I deal with a significant amount of pain on a daily basis. Right? I'm not trying to bore you. I don't want you to feel sorry for me, but just, whether it be the students that I'm trying to help support on my campus to just larger societal issues, just to my own struggles, right? Just to, not having been born with a silver spoon in my mouth, just trying to make it. So I say this to say that while I am an August Wilson fan, I, saw, many of his plays in person, including Joe Turner's Come and Gone. So I'm a fan. Right? I support the arts. But because of my day-to-day existence, man, sometimes I don't know if I'm in the mood to pay for the privilege of experiencing more Black pain on my larger-than-life screen on Friday night. That's all I'm saying, man. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that Viola Davis didn't do a good job in Fences. I'm not saying she's not a good actress. I'm not saying it's not compelling. I'm not saying it's not complex. All I'm saying is I deal with this ish every day of my week, right? Sometimes on Friday night, I want to see some X-Wing fighters in space, right? That's all I want to see, right? Let's keep it simple. Kill the big guy in black. He's evil. Universe is saved. You know what I'm saying? The dinosaurs are now free. Sometimes that's what I want to focus on Friday night. So that's the only flip side to this. This idea that, so many of those roles are coming from this source of, let me kind of like rip open my skin and you can see in more detail, the pain I'm going. Because remember, Matt, these are not documentaries. I mean, I'm going to throw that out there. We kind of forget this. Oh, well, The Help was so very interesting to me, Dr. G. Like, The Help was, enlightening. I learned a lot from The Help. Well, that's good for you. But as a historian, The Help wasn't nearly as enlightening for me. I'm quite familiar with the story of subjugated Black women, and I can quote you statistics like roughly 80% of all Black women were working as domestics up until World War II, before the Great Migration opened up the marketplace where they could, have jobs and things of that nature. So, I'm quite familiar. So it's not enlightening to me. But this idea that I just want to remind people that it's not a documentary, though. This is a product of a white female's imagination. Her name is Catherine Stockett. And so therefore the movie was made to make money. Let's be clear about that part. It was made to make money. So I don't feel this sense of obligation. I used to when I was younger, but now, I can have a dispassionate, critical lens where I can say, well, no, I'm not going to watch that movie. And I can be a little bit more selective. And then when I do watch the movies, I have this rubric to help me analyze, because I want to say, as a, repeat what I said earlier, this has all come from a love for the movies. So I'm able to watch a movie and say, I like parts A, B, and C, parts D, E, and F could be improved, and here's why. I mean, in other words, we can have a more complicated conversation. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? So I'm glad you raised that point about these movies, because I think we're at the point where it's still bittersweet, right? In terms of, you know, how we should you know, still resolve, you know, these movies that bring us additional perspectives and bring us, you know, poignant performances, but at the same time go back to this familiar well of, well, the only way I can understand the Black experience is through a painful, you know, a lens of pain, right? You know, and let me chuck my popcorn and see how interesting this is. Matt, you still there? I don't know if we paused or not.
Yeah, hopefully I didn't freeze.
Oh, okay. I think,
Oh, no, I was just wanted to make sure that it said everything that you wanted to say. I didn't
Okay.
want to interrupt. You were saying some excellent points. So thank you for that. We have another question. Did you see the Pixar movie Soul? There was a lot of criticism around the storyline and representation. Are animated movies that are actually about Black characters that remain Black characters that you're aware of? Let me try and rephrase that. Are there animated movies actually about the Black experience with Black characters made by Black creators?
ooh. Well, I mean, the short answer is no, unfortunately. But let me explain why. Yeah, no, that's a tough one. So let's go back to the parts of the equation we had laid out earlier. We're talking about very few, you know, writers in the room, you know, very few directors in the room, and so that's what makes it very difficult for these other mechanisms to fully manifest themselves, as far as telling, you know, a story that is nuanced from various angles. It's not hard to do that when you just don't have, you know, the people in the room to help foster that along. Now, that being said, they did make the movie Soul, and maybe the anonymous attendee is referring to other movies such as Princess and the Frog, whereby the movie could be aptly retitled "The Princess is the Frog." Right. When you total up the total number of time on screen that she's human versus frog, she's actually on screen more time as a frog, right? Okay, so when we talk about this movie Soul, I do have a couple critiques. You know, I'm glad they made it. I'm glad they made the attempt, but sometimes the attempt is not enough, right? You know, I mean, if I attempt to make pancakes for my family on Saturday morning and I put too much salt in, they're inedible. Thanks, Dad, but we can't eat it. So on one level, I get some credit for trying to make the pancakes, but I would get the full credit if we all ate it, you know, licking fingers like, oh, this is great, this is awesome, and the bacon was superb, like it was not too crispy, like, oh my dad, you're just the greatest. But no, I mean, if we have to say, well, let's pack up and go to IHOP, I mean, I didn't fully complete the deal, right? So just making the attempt alone is not enough, I think, if you want full credit. So allow me to explain. For those of us, again, it's spoiler alert, for those of us who saw the movie Soul, my critique is that this movie prioritizes whiteness in a unique way. The movie is based upon a Black protagonist. In fact, that's part of the billing, this idea that this is one of the first animated Pixar movies featuring a Black protagonist. And that's true, because some of us might be thinking, well, Dr. G just said Princess and the Frog. No, that was in the realm of cell animation drawing. So when you think of like the older Disney movies like Bambi, Cinderella, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, that's cell animation, right? So that's Princess and the Frog. What we're talking about are the more modern movies, like when you think of Nemo, Toy Story, Frozen, anyone, right? Tangled, or even it just came out in March, Raya and the Princess Dragon. I may have botched the title, but Raya, right? It just came out in early April, March, excuse me. That's Pixar, that's animation. So this is the first Disney Pixar movie that features a Black protagonist for the more modern animated movie. Okay, that's great. But here's the thing. A movie came out in 2017 You may have seen it, but the premise was Black bodies were being harvested and being displaced in favor of white consciousness. So whites were to achieve some sort of immortality by living through these Black bodies that, were displaced of their consciousness. And speaking of Daniel Kaluuya, our recent Oscar winner, that's him, that's his face, right? He was the subject, okay? Again, not to mention this idea of he became representative of a larger American experience as a British, actor, but okay, never mind that. But the point is that this was the subject of a horror film. This was a horror movie. My Black body displaced in favor of white consciousness, horror movie. I mean, look at the graphic, like the open-ended lobotomy. This is terrible. This is a horror movie. But Matt, what I just described is exactly the plot. I'm sorry, but that's exactly the plot line for Soul. 4 years later, it's the subject of a kid's animated movie, really? Because here's the deal. If you look very carefully, I saw this poster 1,000 times before I saw the movie. I didn't think anything of it because I'm focused on who? The Black protagonist, right? Ladies and gentlemen, spoiler alert, Black protagonist, we talked about how this is unusual in that, he's an adult, he's a middle-aged jazz teacher, in contrast to our youthful protagonists like Raya. She's a teenager, kicking arse. Tangled, she's, a youth kicking arse. Brave, a youth kicking arse. Frozen, a youth who is the bomb.com. She can create her own castle. Geez, that's great. Meanwhile, no, seriously, Matt, are you going to be walking around? I mean, I'm not saying, you're not culturally aware, but really, are you going to be walking around with this stuffed animal when you go to Orlando next? The bespectacled dudes, you're going to carry him around? I mean, I'm just saying. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there might be a longer line of stuffed animals you're going to get before you get this one. And I'm Black, and I'm saying that. You see what I'm saying? I mean, I got glasses. All right. But, so that's that. He dies early in the movie, y'all. Whoops, dies. And then the whole point is he wants to make it back to Earth in his body. He makes it back to Earth. The body of the cat. His consciousness is dispossessed in favor of Tina Fey. Tina Fey is living in his body. She's tasting pizza for the first time. She's loving life. This is amazing. And so I just find it like utterly amazing, as it is alarming, that at the end, again, spoiler alert, the end of the movie, he realizes he is selfish for wanting his own body back. Wait. No, seriously. 4 years ago, this was a horror movie. Now I'm sitting here watching this with my kids, and I'm like, yeah, the next time a white person takes over your body, you should give it up to them. You shouldn't be selfish and wanting to keep your own body, son. I mean, is that the moral? Is that really? I mean, the whole point, Nemo, is finding Nemo. The whole point is, son, you're my son, and I need to travel the waters, right? Tortoises through the channels, the Arctic, the Indian Ocean. I need to find my son. I need to be connected. This is my family. That was the whole point. But now you're telling me, well, if a white person takes over your body, maybe you should be more considerate and give it up. So yes, I have a critique of us, right? And I think that, yes, we can celebrate aspects of it, but I just don't want Hollywood to create the narrative for us. No, look, it's the first Black protagonist. You should celebrate. No, look, Jamie Foxx, you should celebrate. No, and I get all that. But remember, think about our other pattern. Jamie Foxx, crossover comedian / music star, right? I mean, they could have picked anybody. It's not like he was playing the piano on screen, right? They could have picked anybody, in terms of, becoming now part of the Disney universe and being blessed by that. I mean, the actress who voiced for Raya, she talked about how, she was in the Star Wars franchise first. She had a bit role in Star Wars, and then they gave her this. And she talked about how her life has changed. Just on virtue of starring in a Disney movie, her life has forever changed. So imagine, what if that doorway was opened up to fill in the blank? Just another, so that's what I mean by the paucity of opportunity. I mean, Jamie Foxx, arguably by already being an Oscar winner, is going to be okay, right, in terms of opportunity in Hollywood and things of this nature, and he has several projects lined up. But I think this was, again, another missed opportunity, not only in terms of the story, but also in terms of behind the story, who had a chance to participate in this space.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting with I have to admit that it had been years between seeing Get Out and Soul, and the way that you just described it really that blew that up for me. But also too, what you were referring to earlier about whites having a license to fantasy, and then here's a movie about a dead white person having fantasy through a African American body
Very good.
as well. So wow. I try
Yeah.
to listen when I can.
No, okay. No. You put
I
it together.
am going to allow for a couple minutes of fantasy here by asking you a very serious question, and feel free to not answer if you don't want to. But I'd like to know what vehicle you would drive in the Star Wars universe if you had the choice of vehicles throughout the entirety of the universe of Star Wars. What would you fly? What would you drive? What would you
Oh my
operate?
God. That okay. So clearly you pressed the button there. Okay. So let me tell you off the top what I'm considering. The iconic X-Wing fighter, starting there, I'm considering that. The Millennium Falcon, I'm also considering that, but I'm thinking for my purposes, it just might be a little bit bulky and a wheelie. I mean, I think it's just famous. But now that I'm thinking about it, while the X-Wing fighter did capture my heart initially, I think being able to pilot the Imperial destroyer. I'm talking about the one that carries the Emperor with the trifold wings that come down. Ooh, that is that's badass, man. And again, and I know Vader's TIE fighter is unique, but just the way the wings come down, that is so smooth. And oh man, I think that would just be cool. Just be floating around in space in that thing, in that triangle type, man, oh man. I mean, Boba Fett's machine is pretty cool. I don't know if the Mandalorian kind of just made it a little too familiar for me, but it's just that mystery. I'll never forget Return of the Jedi when, I was like, that's got to be a real hangar. That's got to be a real, look at all those soldiers lined up. That has got to be real. I mean, but see, that's my point. The power of movies to capture my imagination that way. You know what I mean? Where I'm really thinking there's a blurred line here. This could be real. But I would probably say, and I think that's the title. I don't know if I botched it, but I think it's the Imperial transport for the Emperor. That you know what I'm talking about. The one the wings fold. I think that would. I think that would be. Yeah, I think that would be it. Wow, that's a great question. I'm gonna ask my brother this. Man, he's a fanboy too. I'm gonna see what he says. Oh man, that's a good one.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it there. Thank you, Dr. Gooding. Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you for your insight. And, thank you, the viewers, our patrons, for coming to this program tonight. If you have any questions, feel free to direct them to me, mbender@stdl.org. Thank you once again, Dr. Frederick Gooding.
And Leslie, let me just say, I'm very appreciative of the library for opening up spaces like this. So we can have these conversations, and I'm just appreciative of the interest that you've taken to even ask me a question like that. If anyone wants to stay connected, I just dropped a link so that we can continue the conversation. I hope it's not the last time. Next time I have a book, maybe we can talk again about how to continue having this conversation. And lastly, I of course would ride that Imperial transport without the Emperor on board. I don't think he'd make for good company.
That is a good point. All right. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.